last week or so, there was an incident at a spa where around 7 to 8 people had died. I believe a spa owner, a majority of the people that died were of Asian descent. And just really wanted to talk about that, and also what's spiking it. How do we go from here as far as trying to calm a lot of this anger that's going around as far as racial equality, gender equality, things of that nature, this fight for equality, yet there doesn't seem to be any solutions or any quell down. It just only seems to be rising and getting angrier and angrier. Here in America, if you look back historically, there's always been a group that's been picked on. Since, the founding of America, it was American Indians. Irish have been picked on, women have been picked on, obviously African Americans have been picked on, and it's always a group that always seems to be getting singled out. Right now, we're at the point right now where Asians are being picked on. We're looking at the southern border, we're looking at the immigrant crisis, which a lot of times becomes Latins being singled out. And we're also still looking at racial equality for African Americans as far as with police. But what you're seeing more of in the news now is the Asian hate. And not too long ago, it was Muslims were the terrorists blowing everything up, things of that nature. And so we have to come from a standpoint, I just want to point this out, we have to come from a standpoint of understanding we're always pointing the fingers at a group, but we're never coming with a solution. We're never finding a solution. And now we're even starting to point the fingers at white supremacists. Now they're being labeled as terrorists, domestic terrorists, things of that nature. So every group now is getting pointed at. And there's no real talk about how do we come together? How do we find a common solution? How do we find a way to find some common ground? African Americans obviously have, been around dealing with the civil rights movement, trying to build equality for pretty much not only ourselves, for every other group. I think every other group that's come behind us as far as equality, women's rights, gay rights, things of that nature have come off the backs of the civil rights movement and what we've put our work into. Doesn't mean that others haven't put in work, but it just means that African Americans have done a brunt of the work, in my opinion. And so with that, I've noticed that other communities have not necessarily joined in on trying to help the African American cause. I always notice African American causes are trying to help other groups. I notice African Americans always trying to help, the Latin groups as far as when it's with immigration or when they're getting picked on. I notice African American groups, like the Action Network, with the Asian hate thing. Al Sharpton's pushing, our community towards, hey, let's stop this, Asian hate. But we don't see the reciprocation back from other groups. Latin American groups, their organizations say when they see like a George Floyd case or a Sandra Bland, we don't see them outwardly saying, hey, this is wrong. It's whispers because they know eventually it will affect their community. It's whispers, but it's never like, all right, hey, this is a human thing. This is wrong. Asian American groups, same thing. Sandra Bland, George Floyd died. I didn't see a lot of Asian American groups jumping up. And so these are the kinds of, and it's not to separate, but it's to say we're at a crossroads. We either have to come together, all groups, and say enough is enough and start pointing the fingers at certain groups that are holding us back, white supremacy groups, white entitlement, things of that nature, Caucasian things that are going on. Our Caucasian brothers have to start looking at themselves as far as how laws have been tilted towards them in white privilege. But as far as the minorities, we either have to come together or we have to continue to individually grow our own communities. And that's in particular for African Americans. If African Americans are not going to be, I don't want to say catered to, but reciprocated with the same love that I feel like we put out, then everybody's going to have to start looking out for their own groups. And that is something that you've heard, Malcolm in his early days, Malcolm X talk about. You hear Louis Farrakhan, you hear the Nation of Islam. I'm not one for separatism. However, if we're not going to get the equality and the equal treatment, or our groups are going to come together to continue to force towards that equal treatment, then each group is going to have to fight their own individual battle. Asian groups are going to have to fight theirs. Latin groups are going to have to fight theirs. African Americans are going to have to fight theirs, and so on and so on. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves, which is going to get us further? Is it going to be doing it individually, one at a time, one group at a time? Or is it going to be that we come together as a group? But before we come together as a group, there has to be reciprocation. It can't be that one group is always looking out for every other group and the other groups don't look out for one group. It has to be every group comes together. And if it's not going to be that, then it's going to continue to be this slow tracking progress. And that's not just for different cultures. That's for gender equality. That's for everything across the board. So the question is, what do we do?